Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are on this fast forward planet, which officially is no longer wrapped in a pandemic, although more could be coming. It's a human heated planet, as I've been writing since the 80s, half my life. It's a planet wrapped in a bit of an infodemic, as the World Health Organization described the disinformation fog that we live in. It's a planet that's roiled still because of the invasion of Ukraine by Vladimir Putin, and which unfolded in many ways that affect the subject today, how things move across the oceans, including food. And today we're going to talk about the 2/3 of the ocean that has been so deeply uncovered, ununderstood, untracked, ungoverned for so long. There is a law of the sea treaty, but it really doesn't deal with the issues that we'll describe today, thanks to the journalism, very enterprising journalism and gutsy journalism of Ian Urbina, who's my guest today. Ian, it's good to see you.
Nice to see you again, Andy.
And I'm coming to everybody here from an arm of the sea. I live on the shore of an inlet in Wabanaki Territory in what's now called Maine, Hancock County. And I think about the ocean every day. And I'm so glad to have a chance to catch up with Ian. We both worked at the New York Times. We overlapped there significantly. And I got to tell you, I'm jealous about this, what he did. I'll describe that in a second. Ian is the founder and, was initially a lonely pursuit. He and a photographer, two or three, for the New York Times, starting 2015 or so, getting out into this arena without a lot of law and but with a lot of commerce. And now the Outlaw Ocean Project is a multi-pronged team effort that has included everything from a podcast to a new video series that's just in the middle of coming forward. Of course, he had the book, The Outlaw Ocean, that grew out of his Times series as well. Let me just kind of get going here. So Ian, I wanted to start with when I knew you pre-ocean, you were a really enterprising and deep digging investigative journalist. You shared the Pulitzer Prize for uncovering Elliot Spitzer's unethical behavior related to his hiring of high-priced prostitutes and all that kind of stuff. You did stories on chemical testing, OSHA lapses, the occupational safety issues, fracking, and the like. And then something happened. So what happened?
What happened was I was asked by my editor at the Times what I wanted my next big project to be. And she asked me 2 months before I thought she was going to ask me. So I was utterly unprepared for the conversation. And I had to kind of pull something out of my back pocket because it was hard to get time on her calendar. And so what I pulled out of my back pocket was this half-baked idea that had planted itself in my head many years earlier when I was in grad school working as an cultural anthropologist, and I took time away from graduate studies. I was at the University of Chicago, and I hopped a plane and went and worked on a ship that was anchored in Singapore called the RV Heraclitus, and it was sort of an offshoot of Biosphere, and it was a bunch of international researchers that went around and explored and looked at coral reef, and I just thought it would be so different than anything I knew. And we never left port. I spent 3 months in that port and talking with loads and loads we got locked down in some bureaucratic thing. And so I spent a lot of time meeting people. And again, I was a cultural anthropologist, and that matters because I was fascinated by what I saw as this tribe, this sort of transient diaspora tribe of people that I had suddenly found myself among. And these seafarers, these fishers they had their own folklore and language and humor and crime. And the stories they told me were epic. And I thought, wow, if I could choose a new dissertation topic, I should choose this. Anyway, I went back to grad school, and then I went to the New York Times, and 2 decades later, there I was sitting in the hot seat. And I thought, oh, okay, if you're asking for anything, why don't you send me to sea? I know there's some crazy things happening out there, and I bet you I could bring you back some really riveting stories.
That's so interesting. So you said in that initial inquiry when you were in grad school, you didn't leave port, right? You heard the stories, and that changed with this series, right? You headed offshore.
Yeah. Once Rebecca Corbett was my editor's name, and once she
Sure.
and Dean Baquet approved the series, then off I went. And first stop was Songkhla, Thailand, to take a look at this issue of human slavery and distant water fishing fleets. And we went offshore and went pretty far and wide looking to get on vessels. So it was a baptism by fire exposure to the gritty underside of this world. But I had not grown up like you who spent a lot of time on the water. I had not spent time on the water. I didn't know if I'd get seasick. I didn't know what I would think of the space. I don't to this day. I'm not a seasoned sailor, but I became very fascinated with the people and the realm, and just kind of I got hooked by it and could never go back to normal landed life after that.
That's so interesting. And do you have family and stuff?
I do. I have a wife and a 20-year-old son and a 33-year-old stepdaughter and a grandchild.
How did this kind of go sit with them?
I think you know the answer to that question. It never sits well. I mean, it was a lot of time away from home, and especially after I left the Times and took 2 years to do the book, and I went to all the places that the Times wouldn't let me go, usually for safety reasons. I decided to go when I was allowed to, and that was tough on the family because they were pretty dangerous trips. But I've been doing it long enough that now they just kind of I don't even think they notice when I disappear for 2 months.
So it's interesting to me, the one aspect of this I hadn't realized was well, let me explain. I'll show something that I had this revelation at one point in the newsroom when I was at the Times. Well, first of all, as I said earlier, I hinted I'm jealous because, as you said, I grew up in Rhode Island. I grew up on boats from the age of 4. I had actually sailed in a little dinghy. My dad let me kind of sail off. So I loved and saw the oceans and change. After college, I got a fellowship to study man's relationship to the sea and the Pacific. And while I was there, I ended up on a sailboat. You can see me there sailing 2/3 of the way around the world. And we saw stuff like this trip made me want to be a journalist. There's me on the beach with 2 of my friends collecting what was then the plastic pollution of the time. It was mostly fishing gear. That was an island north of between Australia and New Guinea. And then I got to the New York Times, and I realized at a certain point, 2000, I began reporting a lot on climate and the Arctic, and I realized, the Times doesn't have a bureau up there. There's no one already covering it. I tried to go when I was covering the environment. I tried to get to China, but no. We had Joe Kahn in China writing a prize-winning series, and you tried to go to Africa. No, we already have Africa covered, and so I began covering the Arctic because there was no bureau. And you essentially found this beat, whether maybe not strategically realizing, oh, there's no one there, but so that didn't enter into it.
No, you're quite right. Your intuition's spot on. I mean, I was an investigative reporter at that time, and that meant, by definition, I was constantly parachuting into other people's backyards.
Yeah,
And that's a thorny thing. You go into Dhaka, Bangladesh, to do investigation of garment factories that are supplying the U.S. military that are sweatshops.
right.
You're in someone's backyard, and when you write that hard-hitting piece, you end up making it harder for the beat reporter to do his or her job after you, because now the administration's pissed off at him or her,
Right.
because you're at the same employer. So I was always stepping on toes in all my investigative work. And then the Outlaw Ocean, like you said, your Antarctica bureau dropped me in a realm that no one had laid claim to. No one wanted to lay claim to. I think most people didn't, except for you, and a couple others, didn't even realize there was a sustainable, storyline, out there. There were even enough people out there. There are more than 50 million people that work offshore. So I think it was virgin snow, journalistically, and that's super attractive, as you well know, because it's hard to find virgin snow jurisdictionally or just topically.
So you said you did this second batch of reporting after the Times series, and that came with more danger and the like, and then you began to set up this project. But I want to sort of quickly fast forward to the newest part, and then we'll get back into a little bit more of a chronology. Now I'm going to show a clip from the trailer for this new video series, the 10-part series, Dispatches from the Outlaw Ocean, and we can then keep talking about how this all played forward.
The video came to me from a source at Interpol, and all it had was the subject line, "Brace yourself."
Okay, say go.
Say go.
The circumstances surrounding these killings had remained a mystery. How could such a crime happen and remain untouched? What made offshore violence different and near impossible to solve?
Please help us. Please help us before we die. Please.
This is the Outlaw Ocean.
So as I said, let's talk about this quickly because it's the new part. You had gone from being this individual on this beat. At the Times, you had photographers with you, etc. But then you dove into doing the book, and now it's grown into an apparatus with more people. And tell us a little bit about the Dispatches.
So Dispatches from the Outlaw Ocean is a 10-part series. It's a video series, documentary series. It's a funky thing in that each episode is short. They're about 12 minutes long. That just felt like the right length for the stories. Each is distinct. One of the overarching goals that I have in the journalism is to show the range, the diversity, sort of broaden the taxonomy of people's popular imagination of what's happening out there. So if you say maritime crime, most people think Captain Phillips Somali piracy or the BP spill, which are big deals, but it's a narrow rendering of what's happening out there. So I kind of wanted my agenda is to broaden that out. And the Dispatches 10-part series does that. It really jumps all over the place to make that larger point. And it draws on footage that goes back to 2014 when I first started all the way up to last year. And each episode is a concept, usually with reporting funneling in from multiple different ships, but one's about murder and the other's about slavery, the other's about abortion providing at sea or sea land and libertarians that build, independent nations at sea. And so it's all over the map, but that's the core goal.
And this involves some people who were involved really early on. Ed O, is it O or O?
Yeah, I've been corrected. Yes, O. Great
filmmaker, videographer, who had just done work for the Times too. And you're now there are 10 components that are, I think they're mostly all viewable now, right? Or are they still kind of being rolled?
They're all viewable on the website. Yeah.
Right. That's what I thought. So everyone can go to theoutlawocean.com/dispatches to see these. This reality of, you mentioned that number, 50 million people. And here's a marine, I go to shiptracker.live quite a bit when I'm covering. I was writing about the Russian disruption of grain shipments from Ukraine especially to North Africa, and real peril there for food insecurity. And this site gives you just such a vision, just such a mind-blowing vision of what's going on at sea. This is just the Mediterranean here. So how do you choose your targets given the scope of all of this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, we're a colossally slow-moving beast. We sort of engage in quite decidedly the practice of slow journalism. It's one of the reasons why I wanted to step off the Times, which I have nothing but good things to say about. Everything I know how to do, it's thanks to that institution. But I wanted to take time out of the equation and try to achieve a level of storytelling and investigation that I couldn't if I had to really look over my shoulder at deadlines. So we choose topics that we know will have a shelf life and evergreen status to them. That topic will not be stale and boring a year or 2 years from now. So we try to pick big topics, and then we also think, okay, if one of our criteria is we want all the stories to have at least some part that's a show don't tell exposure at sea. Okay, what does that look like? What are the embeds? How are we going to get out into the space? And can we actually achieve that goal? So they have to be topics that have that possibility too. Seabed mining has been tough on that regard, for example. You know, they have to be things that you can show. And then we also think, okay, has the journalism on this already been so good that we really don't have anything new to add? Do we have an idea of how we could do it different and maybe arguably better, or at least different? And so that's the other criteria. So we choose things that fit those criteria, and then it's a big concept. It's like fish meal, or it's the migrant crisis on the Mediterranean. It's writ large, and only once we've chosen that, then do we start narrowing down on, okay, what does the embed reporting plan look like? And it's often not until the third stage of reporting that we even know who's our narrative driver. You know, what's the actual narrative story that we're telling here? That comes late once you're on the ground often.
Amazing. And so what's the size of your team now? Just talk about how this went from Ian Urbina, book author, to what it is now.
Yeah, so I mean, the book stage, and a lot of this I think you can completely relate to, since you and I had parallel trajectories. The book experience was formative in the sense that I had never worked on my own and had the luxury of being able to build a team around me, and also not have to answer the call, hey, there's been a shooting at this university, get on a plane in an hour, you know, like. And so once I had experienced that, where I had this team around me, a support team, logistics person, 2 videographers, you know, researchers that were just there to help me, it was hard to go back. And also the big thing was, and I got to decide the stories, you know, that's hard to go back from, you know, and 2 years of doing that. So I had a lean team. Fabio Nascimento, a Brazilian amazing videographer, was with me for the whole book reporting. And then it was usually just Fabio and I, and maybe one other translator, fixer. When I went back to the Times for 1 year, I did a series called American Ammo about gun control through ammunition control. And then I thought, you know, I just want to go back to the Outlaw Ocean and build my own ProPublica style thing. So in 2019, I did that. It started with, I think we had 3 other people, and now we have a staff of 10 salaried full-time folks. And then, you know, we're an accordion. When we have a big project, we'll have maybe 4 or 5 part-time folks that are helping us with specific things. And they range. Most of my folks kind of have to do everything, you know, the mural project, the music project, video editing, talking with editors around the world that we're trying to get to run our stuff. That's a big job. And it's key to our success, you know, constantly getting editors at legacy outlets to understand it's free, it's vetted, it's fact checked, it's not going to get you sued, it's no one else is going to give it to you. We just want your audience. Could you take a look at it? And that's a process. One staffer just does that. So we've got 10.
So it's kind of, I didn't realize it's sort of a syndicated content project in a way.
It's syndicated, except we don't have folks we have relationships, but every new thing we have to have an individual. We don't just put it out there and hope they'll pick it up. We go to them and say, this is what we've got. You've got 2 months to decide. We usually write a 10,000 word New Yorker story, and then like a 5-part newspaper version series, and then a doc film, and then a whole bunch of smaller videos. And that whole meal offering is what we go to, you know, Le Monde, El País, El Globo, you know, paper by paper, and say, does any of this grab you? What shape fits your venue and your needs? The Economist. And then they say, I want a little bit of that. You know, it's sort of this weird meal. And then they say, then we work with them. We don't let them edit the stuff. We let them choose the pieces they want. And then if they say, okay, I love this, but it's 200 words long, then we edit it down. And then when it comes game time, 2 months later, everyone pushes it out at the same time. And we handle translation into 10 languages. So a lot of our partners are non-English.
Yeah, I'm showing you. I guess I have the English translation automatically turned on. This is El País.
Yep.
So which of these kinds of publications in other languages have been most actively running some of your stuff?
In Mexico, El Sol.
Mhm.
In Brazil, Folio newspaper and Globo TV. In Argentina, Clarín. In Spain, El País and El Diario. Le Monde Diplomatique has been great. We've also worked with Libération in France. Der Spiegel's tough. We had an initial relationship with them, but it's not because it's just turnover. You lose
Right.
your guy, and then no one else answers your emails, and you got to spend 3 months finding someone else who will actually read your thing and say, "Oh wait, this is distinct. I should take this up the flagpole."
Yeah. Now, in some video clip, I don't have it queued up right now. I saw you, and I think this is important. You were describing, I think one of the facts that comes out in this project is that 99% of the crime at sea is not prosecuted or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And you said you didn't see an easy solution. I think sometimes, even with accountability journalism, there's a tendency to point to a target, say, "Here's the target. There, now we're done. Hooray! Let's get the prize and move on." And I think historically, investigative journalism, like the journalism you've done, has that quality. When I went to ProPublica for a year,
Mm-hmm.
writing about climate, and I think frankly, there was an expectation I was going to turn around accountability stories, but sometimes the reality is scale is the enemy as much as a company. And I think, could you talk about that? Am I correct in saying you've identified some pretty huge problems here, but not necessarily with that traditional conclusion?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's the first time I've heard it put that way, and I'm going to steal it. Like, scale is the problem. There are often culprits. There's always a final actor and a guy behind him. And you can fixate on that person, and you get the guy who's pushing on the corner. You don't get the drug pin. So
Right.
there's always that layers of accountability where the real culprits are probably higher up, several layers deep. That's one issue. The other issue is the point you made, which is that I think the systemic problems are often the space between the dots. So it's like scale is one. Things just get too big, and by dint of that size, accountability, responsibility becomes tougher and tougher. And there are players that benefit from that and love to keep it that way and get even bigger,
Right.
because it serves their bottom line, but they're not actually the driver of it. It's something bigger. It's a systemic analysis. Globalization, and of commerce, of seafood, etc., is an example of this. And so I do try to find ways to say that without it sounding like a sociology professor rant. You know what I mean? Like that is our challenge as a journalist, to translate it into non-wonky terms. And I do try to make sure that gets integrated in the methodology of the storytelling. So even with the Libya story, and it could have been a story about this terrible thing that happened to this one migrant, who's illustrative of lots of migrants, and it's this jail, and he was killed, but like, if you go much bigger and look at, well, who's funding it, how's the EU role, and what's the rhetoric around it, and how is the rhetoric framed as actually we're helping save them, when in fact that's not really true. But you're not pinning it on one country or one guy. You're pinning it on other faceless things. I think that's the best journalism, if you can pull it off. It's hard, but it's really where I think the truth lies.
Yeah, especially again, we think even with plastics now, there's a push for the plastics treaty, which will come out at this new negotiations coming next week. The climate treaty, there's some expectation. Oh, we have a treaty! Hooray! Hooray! Everyone's clapping. Emissions will be reduced. You dealt with the gas and oil realities, also, as I have done a lot. I did come up. I created a graphic recently. I'll show you just to give you a sense of the what I call the scale monster. This is something I throw around on social media sometimes. This is in relation to the energy transition, but the transition to a safer, more lawful ocean involves everything from transparency to human rights to. I think the solutions can involve things like supply chain integrity and new ways to use technology, perhaps, to build that transparency. And if all those migrants and all those enslaved workers had sat phones, then that would change things. But it's not that easy. So I'm glad that you have this model that's kind of getting at that. Let me just hold on. I was going to show another. Oops! Stop! Hold on. I was just trying to play something, but I didn't have it on screen. So let's go back to a couple of things that evolved in the early stages of your project. I'm going to go back to this, and I had this here somewhere. Oh yeah, there's. Let's talk about the mural project. Again, you were pushing the boundaries of the role of journalism, how it connects to the wider media landscape, media involving every possible form.
Mm-hmm.
What expanded your sense of your mission to include things like art? And we'll talk about music in a minute.
Yeah, I mean, I have to start with music because the truth is that the narrative starts there. But at the end of the day, I thought if you look at who reads a really great piece of journalism, say in the New York Times, it's a very small percentage, a very elite, wealthy, mostly English, mostly over a certain age, etc. And I thought, okay, what are big portions of the global pie that are largely missed? And these are not all of them, but big chunks are youth, non-English, and global South, right? And a lot of the stories I was working on were coming out of the global South. So there was the added political unsavoriness of sort of extraction, Western extractionism, where I'm pulling things out of there and feeding it to the wealthy West. So for lots of reasons, I thought, okay, well, are there alternate ways that I can get at some of those demographics, especially non-English and young? And music came first, because I thought if I could take the reporting and I could approach a musician, and then I could take the leap of faith and say, look, here's the story, here's the written piece, here's 2 months time, here's footage, and then here's access to me if you want to ask some follow-up questions. I'm handing it to you, and I'm inviting you, I'm asking you to interpret it in your own language and focus on the things that move you, and to make something in your language with your audience in your medium. And then allow me to use the thing you've made to amplify both of our endeavors. That was the goal with the music project. And it worked really well. There were a lot of musicians and all sorts, and we still are growing. Every month we get a new musician that comes in the door and says, I really want to participate. And the mural project was built a similar way. It's just a different medium. Reach out to muralists, say, hey, would you take a look at the journalism we're doing? And if you find it worthy and it inspires you, could you consider artistically rendering some component of it that speaks to you? Then there are certain things we want to handle because we don't want to sort of misery porn the journalism. We've got to sort of have some controls. So the videos and the footage, we don't hand that over for other folks to edit, but their art is their art. And then we take it and then we amplify it so that people see it, and then we associate with it and say, look, this is an emotional rendering. It's their rendering, but it speaks with our reporting, and they're two just different things, but they help each other. They speak to each other. I think the public is mature enough to understand that distinction. A piece of art is not a piece of journalism, but they can be connected and echoing. And that's what we've been doing, and it's worked great. Like in a weird way, we have murals in Brazil and Argentina and Taiwan and Netherlands and LA, New York, and all over the place. And these artists also become sort of cultural diplomats on behalf of the journalism. And they start doing radio interviews and TV and newspaper. And for them to not look dumb, they actually have to know the subject a little bit. And so they read up on it and then they start talking about it. And that's good.
Let me just play this for a second. You reminded me also of a some posts I did when I was at the Times on .earth about shark fins in China, and the work of Wild Aid. There was a young woman in Beijing I met who was their lead person on the ground in building a campaign to stem shark fin consumption, leading to a lot of illegal or unsustainable fishing. And she said some really interesting things. She said they did early surveys. This is like in the early aughts, mid aughts, 2005 or so maybe, that show that in China, the baseline understanding of shark fins was zero. That the word for shark fin soup in Chinese doesn't have the word shark in it. It's like fin soup or the like. And so they built their campaign, including a lot of art, like culturally tuned art, to make the points, and that reverberated more effectively, that by knowing the context of the audience, that it's not just put out the story and move on.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
it feels like you're
on that, there's to build on your point. If you look at the trajectory of shark fin as a concept, especially in Asia and China specifically, one of the key points was when this, and I'm terrible, I'm not a sports fan, but there's this Chinese basketball player, and when he came out and publicly, it like really moved the needle. And I remember hearing about or reading that and thinking, these cultural figures, whether they're athletes or artists or whatever, have amazing power, and many of them are eager to use it. And it doesn't turn you into an advocate by talking to them and equipping them with your reporting. So we should be doing more of it. If you stay on your plot as a journalist and you're just educating folks, including key folks, and then you send them out to ideally message on it, I don't feel like I'm crossing the journalism advocacy line. It is journalism with a mission, the mission to get that journalism out there.
Right. That's good. And now the music, anytime you're pushing a frontier, it comes with lumps and learning. And there was a lot of attention paid to some of the, there was a lot of fallout like this on how that played out in the early days, and with rights, and and you then issued an apology. And so can you talk about that aspect of the frontiers you push, getting into a new arena? You're not a music publisher or whatever, but you were. So how did that, what are the wider lessons and opportunities there?
Yeah, I mean, so the sort of story to the unanointed, in the most neutral form, non-defensive form I can render it, is the model initially that I cooked up for the music project was a two-pronged model. The model had the ambition of using musicians, recruiting them to help amplify the journalism and get it circulating to places it wouldn't otherwise. And then secondly, seeing if we could find a way to fund the journalism by monetizing a portion of the streaming revenue off the music. And so right now we largely fund our journalism through philanthropies, which is not a sustainable model. And so trying to crack the code on, if a story takes $250,000 to report, and the most you might ever make at the best paying magazine in the country is like 25K, you're never going to close that gap. And so how could we figure out? So the thought initially was we could get musicians to donate their music to us. We would own the rights. We would then pull streaming revenue from the music that would go into the nonprofit to fund more of the journalism. And we'd also use the music outreach as a way to get people to pay attention to journalism. That was stage one. And I thought it was really clever and smart and all above board. And, again, some of the ass whooping that happened in that chapter was completely unfair and inaccurate. But if I focus just on where they were right and what I learned from it, like the pushback came, we recruited 500 musicians from over 50 countries and really grew and had this. And then a small group, about 20 musicians, were very unhappy with the contracts they signed. They didn't like that they had relinquished their rights. They didn't like that we were trying to monetize it off of them. And they had buyer's remorse. And in retrospect, I see why, for sure. And so, this video came out, it threw a lot of like unfair and negative light, but really forced me especially to think about, what do I need to do in an almost Ted Lasso type way, to just like own the places where they're right and change radically how we do this. So the first thing we did was say, okay, we're going to unilaterally give all the musicians back their ownership rights. So we no longer own the IP. You own it 100%. Secondly, we're going to allow anyone who wants to leave the project, they can take the music with them and the art we've made, and they can do whatever they want with it. So we're not going to have any negative discouragements for them leaving the project. And third, we're going to cut off that second prong. We're no longer in future going to try to monetize any of the music. It's all going to automatically go back to musicians, even if they want. And a bunch of them said, no, I joined this wanting to support the journalism. We said, we just don't want to be in the money game. It's just too risky. And I don't know what I'm doing enough. And so let's just just use it as amplification. When we did those three things, which were pretty radical and painful in some ways and sad, it immediately made it got rid of anything you could legitimately say, because those were the core issues. And
Right.
So I apologized. I said, we're going to blow up the whole model. We're going to get rid of these things. And then those who want to stay can. And of the original, I think we had 520 artists. I think we're now at 470. So we lost some artists, but most opted to stay. And we're happy with the new terms, and on we went. But it was a real painful moment for me to learn a lot. But, this is how you grow.
Yeah. Well, and it also circles back to the challenge of funding ambitious journalism that costs money and, endangers people, and having, the support that's needed to do that work carefully and profitably, so it's fundamentally sustainable, is a huge challenge. I did a session, two sessions here the last couple of years with the women who run Global Press, globalpress.co, which is a global network of female journalists trained from the ground up in some of the world's most challenging places. And their first credo is, they won't do it unless they're safe. There's some, safety net. They publish them, they fact check them, they translate them. And that is not a sustainable model yet. And it still requires philanthropy to support. And I don't know. I wonder if there's ever a model that will pay for itself, that's getting the depth or spread of either like Global Press or what you're trying to do, other than other people.
Yeah, I think, and also it becomes more. I can envision scenarios where other kinds of journalism might break even. But if you're talking about investigative long form international on the water, like that just brings the price point up hugely. And
each one of those.
Yeah.
Right.
So I don't see any model that makes it. I don't have any other clever ideas. I'm still hunting for it, because I think we have to crack the code, because investigative long form international journalism is going away. And it's really, really important.
And there still isn't a lot on the water, that part. Is there? I wanted to transition to just sort of next steps. Here's this picture of how technology, at least for ships that have pingers, which is most, shows you the scope of the flow of stuff. You can click in there for all the different questions. How dirty is the fuel? How safe is the crew? What are the corruption? Are they doing transshipment of fish at sea? Have you checked in yet much on the technology options? I did write when I was at the Times. I wrote a couple of pieces about Global Fishing Watch, for example, which I thought was brilliant use of AI, early AI, to look at all that data and say, oh, what's the ship doing meeting another ship in the middle of the Atlantic off of Africa? And they, identifying illegal behavior through data. Is that something you're thinking about more too?
Yeah, no, I mean, Global Fishing Watch is a partner. We work with them very closely, and every week my staff is talking with their staff about really refined uses of their data and others' data. Sky Truth and there's some other players, Windward, and that do similar things. I think they're great. Period. Full stop. I think that there are quantitative types and qualitative types, and they're data folks and they're storytellers. And I think that again, I'm a journalist, so obviously I'm going to have this perspective, but I think that just knowing the data and being able to put it out there is barely half the battle. Like the other half is, how do you actually get the world to care about it? And Global Fishing Watch is really good on the first half in the data, but there still needs to be a lot more using of the data to funnel, to spur litigation, using of the data to spur journalism, using of the data to get lawmakers to write better laws. That whole front is still fairly anemic. But and also AIS, Global Fishing Watch is largely based on AIS, certain type of transponders that are easy to turn on and off. They've got some other methods of putting eyes on portions of the dark fleet at certain times, but the core limitation of Global Fishing Watch and AIS is a serious one, and that is the worst actors turn off their AIS. So you're really seeing the good players for the most part, and if your goal is to fix things, then you got to be looking at the bad players, and how do you get eyes on them? It's not through AIS, it's going to be through other means, and that's where real innovation's got to be happening.
Yeah, and what you just described, I think, getting more of a conversation going between media purveyors and analysts of data and other forms of storytelling can make a difference, it sounds like.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and academics, I think.
Oh yeah,
those two, which well, but having more communication that goes all the way from the data to the academic and the peer-reviewed journal all the way to the journalism, that to me needs to be built in this space more consistently.
Yeah, one thing that well, let's talk about a few more next steps. The Pulitzer Center, which has been really effective at doing a gap analysis of stories related to crisis, environmental, social, and funding projects. They've launched a new ocean reporting network, which I have to think grows a certain extent out of your work. I don't know if that's expressly concretely true, but you certainly did break I shouldn't say groundbreaking, water breaking, wave breaking effort. What do you think about this effort going forward?
I think it's great. Yeah, I think there has been real growth, and much credit to the work we've done, but also AP and a bunch of others. So AP now has a really strong oceanfront reporting. It's actually Ron Nixon who oversees that, our former colleague at the New York Times, and they've been doing really good work. The Guardian has an ocean division. I think AP does stronger journalism than the Guardian, but they do really good stuff there as well. And then the Pulitzer Center. So I think, and thankfully, one of the gripes I had early on was the sort of bifurcated attention where, sort of above the waterline and below the waterline, there was a lot of purely environmental marine reporting, and it was only within the auspices of the environmental desk that was approaching these stories. And my view was we really needed to be talking about both at the same time. We shouldn't just have the State Department and Human Trafficking Office and these folks are talking one conversation, and then the NOAA and marine folks and ocean reporters and environmentalists are talking another. They've got to be talking in the same stories. And luckily, I think we're seeing that in AP and the Guardian and Pulitzer. There's a real understanding that the intersection and on land and off land, more stories about on land crime, tax evasion, document fraud, all these sorts of things that make this illegality and unsustainability possible. So I think there's good stuff. Yeah, AP's been doing great work.
Yeah, that's so great to see. The other folks who have been at this for a while too are Earth Journalism Network.
Right.
I'm a big fan of theirs, and they've had some. Again, they're mostly funding driven. Like they'll get a grant to look at some aspect of fishing or mangroves and the like, and it's driven some of that work. The cool thing there is a lot of the journalists are in developing countries. I've done some trainings with them, and like, you're in DC, which is great. You got your team, but what can be done to sort of expand the reach and not have it be reach, but be spread?
Yeah. in a small way, what we're doing is we created the Outlaw Ocean Institute, and it's a sort of when I looked around at how other folks are doing it, one of the things I wanted to avoid just for my own burnout, prevention and sanity, but also just to contribute something that felt substantive. I wanted to go deep, not broad, in the creation of the Outlaw Ocean Institute. It's essentially a program in which my staff and I, we don't take applications unsolicited. We often get pitches for stories, which we don't tend to publish, but we do use them as an eye on early career non-US, non-European journalists who show real promise. And then we reach out and say, hey, would you be interested in this fellowship? We noticed your work and your potential. And so we only just started, we had the first batch. Myanmar, you see Min there, and Mustafa and Gaya. So that's Philippines, Myanmar, and Gambia. And when we give the fellowship, it's a real relationship. So we fly them. In this case, I took my whole staff and these 3 fellows to Mexico. We spent a week together, getting to know them, figuring out where we could help them grow, even if it's just like presentation style or your computer, or wait, Min, you're a videographer in conflict zones and you don't know how to fly a drone. We're going to fix that. I'm going to buy you a drone. I'm going to put you in training. You got to get out of Myanmar because it's illegal there. I'll send you to Thailand. Like really, really figure out where we can help these individuals grow and be better journalists. And we have a great funder who's like, Ian, just decide. And so Min, we bought him video, Mustafa, a new computer, an office space, and then we're working with him on a story. So it's very tailored, and it's a small batch, and we stick with them for a full year. I meet with them once a week. We work on one big story with them. It's their byline. And then we also, a lot of these journalists are limited by the fact that they're publishing in their market, but they're not thinking globally enough. They just think, oh, it's on my Twitter too. And we have a huge infrastructure of ways to get it published in all these other languages. So we take their journalism and get it published a lot of places so that their portfolio grows and they can brag about, okay, I ran a piece that got run in the Guardian and Der Spiegel. And so these are the ways. And this year we're going to have 5, the next batch. So that's what we're trying to do to sort of help seed the future.
Boy, that sounds great. And it builds that, you can't be everywhere, and you also can't be at this forever either. As you said, this is the scale, as we said, the scale monster makes these stories truly perennial. And of course, people who want to do things illegally will find that's also a moving target always, turning off their transponders, finding ways to cover their tracks. So there's no end point here. Do you think about that too, the sort of legacy question?
I don't think much about the legacy question because I'm not trying to build an organization that necessarily lasts. If someone comes up through the ranks that feels like they can carry the Outlaw Ocean Project forward, then I'd happily hand it over. But I try not to make decisions that are pondering that. I try to just focus on my staff, and if everyone leaves tomorrow, are they going to be better off? And can we produce really good journalism? And so I think the other legacy is Mustafa, Min, Gaya. Are they going to, in a year from now? I mean, we try to also use this as a farm team. So I quietly scout, like, do we need an extra videographer on staff? And would Min be interested in, and is his being in Myanmar going to limit us to use him? And should I make him full salary? These are questions I'm constantly thinking about with these folks, but mostly the legacy is, could we do right by these folks for a year and they sort of get a bump up a couple floors as to where they would be otherwise? That's our legacy. And then also, do we put out stories that really change the discussion and get outcomes on the stories? And that's why we're finishing one that's taken us 4 years to produce. It's really strong, but boy, is it a long time to work on one story.
Wow. Yeah, I was going to ask about next steps, next targets too. Or are there places on the planet where you feel frustrated that a big chunk of a certain problem is there, but it's really impossible to get at safely, or either for you or for your other folks?
Well, I'm moving after we finish this Chinese and water fishing fleet project. We're moving to fish meal, and one of the places we're going to be looking really closely is the Siadamala, near Seychelles. And again, the Indian Ocean is a tough place to find the infrastructure, ships that can take you out there, etc. And that's true in lots of places. You've sailed around the world. So there's always the challenge of access. I think that the Western Pacific is journalistically more virgin, if there's such a term. I guess you can't be more virgins, like more dead. I think the Western Pacific is a especially dark region, and there's a lot of interesting stuff happening over there. It's just so far away. And so in my next batch of fellows, I'm really looking for talent in that part of the world so that we can figure out how we could do more over there. Fiji.
That's great.
These regions.
So again, just always more to do. Did you ever anticipate that, as you said at the Times, there was this hamster wheel quality? I know that pretty well. And then there's the deep dive, which you always crave. But is there a dive that feels too deep? Does this ever get tiring for you? To be trying to fill so many gaps, to deal with a story with such scale. What keeps you going?
Yeah, I mean, it feels a little bit like, I Love Lucy and the Chocolate Factory, where I'm constantly trying to keep up with the range of duties. And a lot of those duties are not reporting. They're like running staff and fundraising and that stuff. And I don't love those parts of it, but I know that they're necessary. And some stories feel like they're at the outer edges. This China investigation is a tough one. And then I would say I am getting older, and the at sea portion of the reporting, sleeping on South Korean squid ships, and for weeks on end, and really pretty disgusting settings, and that's getting pretty exhausting. So I don't know how many years I have left, but I think I have at least 5 to 10, and then I might look for something that's a little bit less taxing physically.
Well, I wish you luck going forward on that, keeping the stamina, keeping everyone secure and safe, and keeping the stories going. You're reminding me a little bit of what you just said of Paul Salopek, the ultimate slow journalist who's walking around the world. And he's in like his 10th year. I don't know. I caught up with him when he was in Myanmar, stuck because of pandemic. He came on the show because he had nothing else to do. He couldn't walk anywhere. And now he's in China. I don't think he has family on the home front, so that might be easier a little bit for him. But Ian Urbina, with your project, the Outlaw Ocean Project, I hope you thrive, and I'm eager to help if I can in some way or other, beyond just doing these shows. So just keep it up and stay in touch when that new episode drops. We'll have you come back, and I'd love to do a webcast sometime with some of the fellows just to kind of
I'd like that. That'd
see what issues are like for them going forward. And I'll just say that's a wrap for today. It's a Friday. There's lots of work to be done. Your desk is always overloaded, I can see. And so thanks everyone who tuned in. And this gets archived right away. It's Sustain What episode, probably number 400 or so, since I started 3 years ago. And but these all depend on people sharing them, watching them, sharing them. They're on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And get in touch anytime out there by looking at that scrolling distracting bar at the bottom for information on how to reach me. You can subscribe to my Substack platform to roughly keep track of these shows too. And Ian's on Substack as well. So thanks again. This was great, and good to catch up with you.
Thanks, Andy. It was great.